name is Rose Donahue, and we are filming at the Quantum Arc Media Studios in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm here today with Adam Davis, an associate professor of visual and digital media at Nevada State College. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
I'm so happy you could make it, and let's just jump right in.
Okay.
Okay. Tell me about your dissertation.
My wife about left me. There's that.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, she didn't think that one paper could take 3 years, but
it does. That PhD thing.
Yeah. No, it was great. It was a really great experience. And I did. So there's the way the program works. You have 2 years of coursework, and then you take your boards. Then you begin work on the dissertation. And
this was at Southern
Illinois University, correct, yes. Which was a great program, media arts program, but you could kind of specialize in whatever you wanted. And I was a bit of an anomaly there. I had an MFA rather than the MA, which is typical. Okay. And so I did feel like I was catching up.
Masters of Fine Arts
versus Master of Arts.
Okay, great.
It's kind of a path to the PhD, essentially. So the coursework was really wonderful. It was like, if you recall the scene in The Matrix where Neo, plugs in and suddenly with this whoosh, knows Kung Fu. At the end of every semester was like that. It was really intense, but you come out of that feeling like you've learned a lot. So that was great. So the dissertation covered things that weren't necessarily, covered in a lot of my coursework. I tailored papers to it as much as I could, but and my chair wasn't even experienced in this stuff. Nobody was doing this.
And tell me exactly what that was.
Yes. So I was studying, I was using avatars as a way to theorize the body at the intersection of cinema and digital technologies. So it covered everything from movies to video games, virtual worlds, virtual reality, all of that kind of stuff. Representations of bodies,
Any type of, and character. Right? Does the body have to have a character?
So that's a very good question. So a lot of these were representations, of the user and stuff like that. But but I looked at particularly, as my text, I brought in a lot of different things, but as my text I brought in movies with avatars. So obviously the movie Avatar, but the movie Surrogates and Gamer, and even looked at some animation, Cool World, and some other things. And so through those representations and then through all of this other research, that had to do on the kind of digital side of things, then I just kind of made connections like that. But yeah, it was really fun. It was a lot of self-educating. I had, 70 books out from the library for 3 full years. You know what I mean? Just spent a lot of time.
Always. Dog ear, Post-its.
Yeah, tons.
Very cool.
Yeah, but it was fun.
So how did you develop your interest in animation and, that area of filmmaking?
Yeah.
Or digital, I guess, visual digital media.
Right,
Not just animation, whatever, digital media.
Certainly pertain to kind of the present moment, where CG effects, have such a huge presence in Hollywood. I was never a big gamer, per se, I grew up playing video games, of course, but I think I got into it really just, it was kind of this roundabout way where, I was interested in things, coming from a screenwriting background, which was my MFA, I was interested in things like character. And those kinds of representations. We talked about representation in a lot of different ways, but this particular way that a character, appears on the screen, and this is actually one question I pose to my students, is what we are seeing when we see character, all of the representational elements that are going into that, from the image to the actor to the performance to the kind of amalgamation of all of those. And when you add in digital technologies and digital representation into this, then it's, a whole other layer.
Absolutely. So, for example, what about, with Lord of the Rings, we have all of the characters, and then we have Gollum.
Yes.
So I think of, there's also the elves and the orcs, and I know so much practical effects went into those things. But Gollum's, CGI and everything. Yeah. So I guess, what does it mean to have a combination of digital media and human beings? Is that something that you explored specifically?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And there's many aspects to discuss here, from Andy Serkis's motion capture performance. And then the way that Gollum was, particularly animated, which is fascinating with its sort of translucent skin and stuff. Lots of fascinating stuff there. But part of what I really analyzed was the otherness of the digital. And this goes back to like Ray Harryhausen movies, where the stop motion clay effects, and these creatures or beings that are often there for the hero to vanquish or kill or overcome. And I love those old Ray Harryhausen, movies, Sinbad and Jason and the Argonauts and stuff. So looking at this kind of modern update of that with digital technologies, and we see, of course, a lot of that. Lord of the Rings is interesting because, as you mentioned, the orcs were, generally, guys in costumes, which is we've seen, movies for a long time. So Gollum occupied this kind of interstitial space between the kind of human and, alien in a sense. And literally he's got this backstory where he was, Hobbit, played by a human actor. And then he transitions into the digital through a morph effect, which itself has, a place in, digital technology, And so but then looking at that character and the way that he is treated, by other characters in the film, by the film itself, the way at times he becomes more acceptable to the human-like characters, the hobbits, when he's sort of behaving, and then those times when he is antagonistic. So he is actually literally a split character, often shown in split screen, with a split ontology, with the backstory, with the human. Andy Serkis playing him actually on film, and then virtually through motion capture, and I don't know. Once I started unpeeling Gollum, it was just...
I'm sure. It sounds, from just
endless.
What you were saying, it seems like so many layers to go through.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild, though. I haven't... I think a lot of people go to films to enjoy them, but don't always dive into all the theory that is going on behind it.
Right. And they don't necessarily need to. It's not...
Right. We're all
it's
enjoying
not always the fun
ourselves.
part.
Yeah, it's not always fun. But
academically
it's
kind of wonky, but... Yeah. I enjoy it, but...
So you are trained in doing a range of digital media things, including editing, CGI. Can you tell me a little bit, just check off a few things that you're involved with or have done?
CGI, unfortunately, is not one of them.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine. I wish I could. I absolutely wish I could, but I come from a more traditional background. But I do screenwriting, editing, sound design, cinematography. We're a smaller school at NSC, and so, which actually worked for me because I have a lot of interests. I don't know that I'd specialize in one, anyway, or I'd feel sort of pigeonholed if I did. And so this position worked out perfectly because I get to teach everything. Photography and then, of course, the studies, theory courses and stuff like that.
Sure.
Too, so.
How important is it to know about the practical side of filmmaking when you're studying theory?
I really like juxtaposing the two. They are traditionally separate, and in a lot of universities are siloed. I think this trend is waning somewhat, but it's I've started to incorporate some production work into my theory classes. Not a lot because I can't assume that everybody's got the right kind of training. But for instance, we did a surrealism class this last semester.
Cool.
Which was fascinating, some David Lynch and, lots of strange films. But at the end of each unit, I had kind of an application, session where we would talk about, what we've learned and how we might apply that directly into film production. And talked about some kind of scenarios or ideas, and I had different exercises that we did with the students. Then at the end of class, we spent a session. We kind of two sessions. One sort of planning, what we might like to do, and then the following one we all just got together, split them up into two groups. I'd worked some kind of basic goals or a basic kind of narrative structure, really loose, for them to play around with. But it was all about them getting the kinds of shots, understanding how to make it work with sound, manipulating the performance, stuff like that, so that they could then, at the very end, they could either edit a cut of what we shot, or write up a short paper on the experience and how we incorporated all of that stuff. So we got 5 or 6 wonderful little movies that were just kind of made, really quite quickly, in the context of a studies class.
That's neat that you gave them the option of the paper or the practical.
Yeah, I felt like I had to do that. And it actually worked out, because some of them preferred one or the other, or
Makes sense.
and some of them were bogged down in production stuff at the end of the semester anyway, and it just wasn't practical. But yeah, it was split about, roughly half and half, so.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
So, it's helpful to have practical when studying theory. How about theory when studying or doing practical?
Doing practical stuff, yes. No, absolutely. I'm a big believer in it. That one's been challenging because there's so much to learn.
Yeah.
I do try to fit it in wherever I can. I was somewhat idealistic, when I started out, and I wanted to pack a bunch of theory and history into it. That didn't end up quite working out. But we are always, when we study aesthetics or expressivity, we don't hit the theory very hard, unfortunately. I'd still like to find more ways to do that. But we are always critiquing our films. I'm always pushing beyond like the technical. You know what I mean? Was it in focus, or did you get this move right?
Sure.
That kind of thing. All of those things are important. But I always want to know why this shot, especially as they get into the upper level classes. And what are we trying to achieve, with this film? What's the experience that we're having? And to view it and sort of critique it in that way, so that as they get the basic technical stuff down, then they can start thinking those in expressive terms as well. And that's what I really want to get to. And that's why I really enjoyed like the junior, senior level classes.
That's very cool. When you say the experience of the film, is that measured in like emotional reaction, or is it measured in, let's see, other ways that would be measured, like
that's part
visceral reaction,
Yeah.
Intellectual reaction? What would you say is the rubric for experiencing a film? And I guess it goes back. You can go to a film and just enjoy it, but
Sure.
in your classes, I guess.
And this is part of that kind of enjoyment. But a lot of it has to do with, one thing that I see commonly in student productions is there's a story. They feel like these events happen and these people say these things, and then it comes to some sort of conclusion at the end. There's a tendency to rush that story. You've got it there on the script, we get these lines and these shots, and then you go in and edit it and the thing is put together. And it feels, when you're a student, just accomplishing that much is often an achievement. Yes. That's hard, for somebody who's new to this. Absolutely. There's so much work that goes into it. But at a certain point, and one question that I don't often vocalize, but that I really want to ask students, is if this wasn't your own film, would you enjoy this film as it is, shot and produced? Because we all fall in love with our films, you know what I mean? It's kind of inevitable.
Yeah.
And it's partly because you see everything that you intended in that film. It's somehow has
and
a presence
in
it.
But it doesn't mean everyone watching will know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but it can be hard to distance yourself. So when I'm talking about the experiential aspects, part of it is emotion, or affectivity. That there's the way that, and it goes beyond just emotional cues, but we have, in our film theory course, for instance, we did this on the other side, where we measured our emotional reactions, as we watched something. So it's kind of metacognitive thing. It's a little tricky, but that was a really rewarding experience, to see them start to pull that apart and to see how film is ultimately kind of this, has this emotional priority running through it. But another one, really simple but often overlooked, is the use of time. Is that we need time to experience certain things and to immerse ourselves into a scene or a world before moving on to the next scene or the next action or whatever. And this failure to account for time is one of the most common things that I see in student films. And this is that kind of intangible. This is what happens between the lines in the script.
Sure.
That you just have to know. It's the art of the director, and the editor.
Yeah, how would you accommodate time usually? Yeah. Sure. Do you have a suggestion?
Well, here's the hard part, is that there's real-world time,
right.
And then there's running time, but then there's this kind of emotional time, or experiential time. And it really varies depending on the scene or what's going on. But for instance, somebody, reacting to something or the process of a reveal, there's lots of, those kinds of moments where it's the manipulation of time, and that happens through the shots, through the edits, through the music, through the sound. All of those kinds of things. Because you can't just drag it out.
No.
I need more time for this, so I just hold on the shot longer. That rarely works.
Sure.
So this is where all of those other elements come in to produce something that feels still like it's, brisk enough and active enough, even though certain moments may be expanded, while other ones are contracted.
Sure.
To guide and kind of measure that experience.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah. So at Nevada State College, you teach both sides of the spectrum, theory and practice, and you combine them together. And I mean, it's a great option for students in Nevada to learn about film.
Yeah.
I understand your office is filled with some antique items. Do you have a favorite antique film thing?
Oh, what do I have in there? So I've got I've got a number of old typewriters, cameras, of course, Super 8 millimeter, and then a bunch of old still cameras. I love the accordion cameras. I've got a few of those. Those Polaroid land cameras are really cool looking. I've got film cans full of film.
Oh, wow.
So that's cool. Old lenses.
Is it developed film?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's good. So it won't be lost to time.
Right. It's mostly stuff from my undergrad days, and
you probably did some work on
some
film.
16 millimeter stuff.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. Not all digital yet?
Yeah. It's at the time we did Adobe Premiere was still kind of a little consumer program. We did a little bit with that. We were cutting on Avid for our video stuff, which we did with 1-inch tape. Wow. But then you entered the 16 millimeter program, which basically emptied your bank account, and
it's a lot.
But it was fun. Yeah, we'd cut on these old Steenbecks and do what you can. Yeah,
very cool.
No, it was a lot of fun.
I have a final question for you. So, for the rogue indie filmmaker out there, what is a aspect of film theory, the best one, the top one, you think they should know?
Well, I'm actually working on some scholarship now because I had that same question.
Oh, good.
In a sense,
Sure.
I wanted to think about looking at our program, and I wanted to create some. Well, I initially started. I was looking for text for my classes, and I couldn't find anything that was doing exactly what I wanted it to do. So I started kind of building my own stuff, and then eventually I thought, well, I should just start writing this stuff up. So I have 3 things.
Oh, good.
And one of which we've talked about already. So one is conceptual, the next is experiential, and the third one is psychological. Those are eventually going to be, I'm working on the conceptual one right now. They will eventually, hopefully, be 3 books.
Okay, that makes sense.
So there's a lot of information there, obviously. But having spoken about the experiential, the conceptual is one that I do a lot with. And this is more at the forefront, has to do with screenwriting, but also, film production. But a big part of this is the origin of it is I wanted to move students away from making movies that just kind of are based on other movies, It's just fine, we can certainly emulate, the great films and stuff, totally fine. But I thought, let's really utilize this film school education. Because it's partly about learning to use a camera and tell a story. You don't necessarily need film school for that. You know what I mean? You can learn all kinds of stuff on YouTube.
It's true.
So, but they're learning all kinds of other things as well, and they're learning how to learn and how to process knowledge.
Very useful.
Yeah, how to analyze film and how to incorporate theory, that kind of stuff. And sometimes there's still a disconnect. You know what I mean? Here we do movies, there we do anthropology, or you know what I mean, whatever. So I sort of devised, some kind of system, to bring all of this together and to really explore themes from a thematic perspective. And the core of this is, sorry, this is a long answer.
It's totally fine. I'm still with you. Good. Yeah.
The core of this is there are stories and stories they're wonderful, but they're in a sense disposable. You know what I mean? A character has a challenge, they overcome obstacles, they are successful at the end for the most part. You know what I mean? And you can insert a number of different variables in there, and we get that, a lot.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make it a little bit more personal, a little bit more thoughtful. And so I work with students to develop kind of personal themes. What's your story about? Let's say you have a story. Why do you like that story? What aspect of life or the world are you interested in exploring? And once we get there, then you can break that out into a lot of different facets. Those facets then become your core ideas, your characters, and you are now no longer bound to just a single story. You're now exploring an idea, and that idea can take many different forms, but you're going to stick with it a lot longer because you're invested in that idea. And you can explore different sides of it, you know what I mean? Assign characters to those concepts.
Oh, sure.
And then you have your sort of your conflict, built in, which is ideologically based or based on character worldview,
right.
Or motivation, which is now much less arbitrary because it's centered around, some key concepts that are interesting to you, as a filmmaker and an artist.
So if I may,
yeah.
Come up with an idea and build your story out of it.
Yes.
Rather than imposing a story on an idea you're interested in exploring.
Right. Theme is often relegated
something that already exists.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Right. What did the character learn? That's often what we think about theme. But let's say you're going to do, love.
Great.
Really routine.
Oh, I was hoping you'd give an example.
Yes. So, we have our, typical romantic comedy structures and stuff, and might have, characters that are oppositional in some way and that kind of thing. But you could break down love as a concept, explore it, both good sides and bad sides, everything that you can think about love. Do research about love, read articles about love, or these different facets of love. And then use that to add depth and richness to your story. Let your story grow out of the idea. Because now I have, platonic love, or, romantic love or erotic love, but I also have, the difficulty of love, the challenges of love, the pain of love, all those kind of things. And I can find various concepts, assign characters to them, and then apply the characterization to humanize them. We don't want it to be didactic and moralizing, But then those characters are now kind of representative of these, various ideas. You put those, so when you put characters together, you're putting ideas into play with one another. And so suddenly those characters, that character interaction just explodes with all kinds of stuff that you can write in there. Their arcs, separately or together, suddenly become very interesting because now you have ideas that are intermingling rather than just characters who, you're still trying to get to know.
Sure.
So, yeah. Anyway, something like that.
Amazing. No, that was a good note to end on.
Good.
Next time we might have you talk about digital representation of
Absolutely.
love.
Anytime.
Let's see how that goes. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yes.
It was awesome.
Yeah, that was fun.
Good.